coming, and thank you for showing an interest. This is by way of trying to explain to people quite why I've been obsessive about this story for I can't think, most of my life, actually, when I think about it. I first met Jaufre when I was a student at Warwick, and I was specialising on doing medieval French literature, and as that such had a unit on the troubadours. And my tutor, who's now a very renowned troubadour scholar, decided to throw me, her name is Linda Patterson, and she threw me a copy of Jaufre and said, the academic equivalent of pick the bones out of that and write me an essay. And so I got going on writing her an essay, and it just turned into a total love affair. So strictly speaking, it shouldn't have been in a French course anyway, nor should the troubadours, because it's not French. The troubadours wrote in a language called Occitan. We used to call it Provençal before people got confused with recipe items and other more confusing things like that. People associated it with Provence, whereas the truth of it is Occitan is spoken over a lot of southern and western France, and also certainly in the medieval times was also spoken in the Pyrenees, spoken in the Balearic Islands, and still is spoken in some parts of northwestern Italy. So why it was in a French department course? Because that's what people did with the troubadours. They thought of everything that happened on French soil that probably belonged to the French course. So as soon as I picked up Jaufre, it was obvious it was a bit different. I'd been used to working on Chrétien, who is the main northern French writer, and Chrétien is good and he can be funny and he can be very subtle, but there was something about the tone of Jaufre that set it apart completely. And I will just read you, this is my favourite thing to read really, just the very first few lines of this, and it's not in the best accent. I don't actually speak Occitan, but this is giving you a flavour of what it's all about. And I will just read you the first bit, and then I'll do you the same in English afterwards. So that it starts off, d'encontre de bonne manière, das auta razón versadera, de sensi de cavalerias, d'ardimendi de cortesias, de proezas et d'aventuras, de forts destrainas et de duras, das aut d'encontre et de batalla, odets otzila comensaia, que si volets ois von dire aitant con I outsit his thigh. So that is how it starts. And instead of being a rather dusty and dull way of saying, I found this in a book and you might like to know where I found the book, this says, if you'd like to hear a story that's remarkable and true, full of intelligence and chivalry and brave daring do, adventures that are strange and bold, battles that are tough, then I'll tell it the way I heard it if I remember it enough. But it's best if you pay attention. Listen close to what I say, for if you chat and whisper, I would waste my time today. You've got to lend your ears and heart to hear a story well, so come up close and gather round, for the story I will tell is a royal tale, a lofty tale, a tale of the finest sort. It's a story of King Arthur and of his noble court. It's got a way of, it's telling you a story, it's telling you to come and listen. And whereas Chrétien does a whole thing about almost like a biblical sense of you've got to hear something in your heart to know you've understood it, that's one person telling another person about a story that's not being, this is directly to the audience. This is saying, stop talking at the back there and listen and come and hear because it's worth listening to. So that was the starting points. And the original, as you could hear, was in verse. I put that bit into verse to try and convey the immediacy of it. Verse was the normal way of telling a story at this point in the Romance languages. It wasn't particularly normal in English. It wasn't particularly normal in Welsh either, for that matter. But it was normal in French and in Occitan and in Italian and I think in German too, and in Castilian. But it's in an 8 meter, which is different from the way I did it. So it's got an octosyllabic, 8 syllables in the line. And he keeps that going for 11,000 lines, which is pretty amazing. And I decided I wasn't going to do that. Whatever else I did with the story, that seemed like pushing it a bit. It is It has a lot of questions about it. Jaufre is still something about which I have discoveries to make because we don't know very much about it. It survives in two manuscripts, both of which are in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and one of those dates from about the end of the 13th century, the other from the beginning of the 14th. And they are, one was written towards the, again, my geography here, towards the southeastern part of France, and the other one from the northwestern part of Italy. And that shows how far it's traveled because the story is dedicated to a king of Aragon. So let's just unpack this a bit. A story is written in Occitan for a king of Aragon, and it's about King Arthur. And none of those things go together because there aren't any other stories about King Arthur written for a king of Aragon, and there aren't any other stories in Occitan written about King Arthur that's worth noting. There's a rather poor, not very Arthurian story, which I won't, it's called Blondin de Cornouailles. Nothing to do with Cornwall either, even though it's got Cornwall in the title. So it's really a bit out on its own. And apart from it, it really isn't like anything else that we have. So there's a lot of questions about why was it written, who was it written for? A king of Aragon, yes. So we know, because of the dates of these full manuscripts, that it must have been ready to copy by the end of the 13th century. And we know that these copies in the Bibliothèque Nationale are not first generation. You can tell they have been copied and copied and copied because there's mistakes in there that copying gives you, like putting a chunk of text in the wrong place, the sort of thing you do if you're in a hurry and you've forgotten that you just skipped a bit. And you couldn't read it out loud from the book for that reason, because it wouldn't flow. There's also a lot of fragments, and the fragments, again, they fall into two groups. So the two manuscripts, the earlier one and the later one, they are distinct from each other in different ways. The basic story is the same, most of the detail is the same. There are just a few little bits and pieces that aren't. And the fragments show they belong to one or the other group of manuscripts, if you're following me. So at some point, there were two originals. We don't know at what point. We don't know at what point it got written down. But just to carry on with the dating question, we know that, I know that the author must have known a story by Chrétien called Cligès, because he names the story and quotes characters and events from the story. Somebody needs to mute. I don't know who it is, but somebody, if you can just check you're on mute, that will be great. Thank you. If you've got any questions, can you pop them in the chat, and then I can, or else try and remember them for later, because I'm rattling on a bit and I tend to do that. And now I can't see anybody else. It's very tempting just to keep on going. So Chrétien was writing probably, and again, we don't know precise dates, towards the end of the 12th century. So we've got about 100 years in which this story came into life. We don't know if it was written down immediately, that it was, we don't know if it was written down immediately it was created, or whether it was written down sometime afterwards. We don't know whether the person who created the story wrote it down, him or herself. We don't know whether it was a him or her. We don't know whether it was somebody high up or not. What I can tell you about the author, and I'm going to probably keep saying him because there's an interest in fighting, which I think makes me think it's more likely to be male. And again, I could be completely wrong about that. But one thing we know is this person was very astute in observing things. And so this brings me on to my reasons for loving the story, which I'll tell you now. So what I loved was, as I say, that opening passage had me at the beginning. Then the voice of the author. The voice of the author is really different to most of what else I've seen in this period of writing. There's a sense of humor. There's a sense of immediacy. There's a sense of connection. He'll say things like, you remember I told you, that happened in front of you when you were listening, that you remember that battle, it happened right in front of you, didn't it? But there are wonderful moments of little bits of observation. I'll tell you some of my favourites. It gets a bit tedious, really, because I always say these, but they are my favourites. There's a lovely part where the heroine and hero are off to get married, and they're on their way, and they get interrupted by a couple of weeping maidens who want some help. And Jaufre is tempted to go, but Brunesen, his love, basically looks at the girls and smiles very sweetly, speaks very sweetly to them between her teeth, and saying, "Lady, you can't have a hair of him until I've finished with him." And just that between her teeth bit is what I think is just classic. There's another wonderful part, which I will come on to, I think, when I'm telling later, where you hear of somebody who's a bit full of himself and a bit arrogant, and you hear he's being shamed, and he's going up the stairs rather more quietly than he came down them, and with a rather dusty bottom. And it's just that you just feel this person is somebody I could easily have a good chat with and enjoy the storytelling with. Something else I love is it's got some unusual bits to it. A lot of it, on the face of it, looks standard Arthurian. You know, you've got knights meeting other knights at crossroads or junctions or fords or whatever. But there's an awful lot that is different and or doesn't do quite what you think it's going to do. So there is a case, for example, where there's a lone tree on a hill with a lance in it. It's a beautiful white lance. It's shining and gleaming. And so Jaufre thinks he'll have this because it will be good. And he's just put his hands on it when a dwarf leaps up and lets out the most deafening cry. And a knight gallops up, and of course they have to do battle. Afterwards, when Jaufre has defeated the knight, which of course he was going to do, the dwarf said, "Well, the thing is, I had to polish that lance 3 times a day." So it's only white and gleaming, not because of magic, but because it's got frequent polishing, which is more than I can say for our house or anything like that. So it's got those things too. It's got different things. There's a fairy in there, a fairy who's an underwater fairy, and she's called the Fairy of Gibel. And Gibel was the name for Etna. And there are stories to do with Sicily and Etna where the fairy who is associated with there is Morgan Le Fay. So we have Morgan Le Fay coming into the story. She's not called Morgan Le Fay, and she has a whole adventure waiting for Jaufre as well, which has almost got some Arabic links. There's a lot more I can talk about with this, and I'll come on to a bit more of it later, and you might have some questions. It's clearly intended to be delivered to an audience. There's a lot of listen. There's a lot of, we'll go back to Jaufre now. There's a lot of make sure you're paying full attention. There's all these things coming in there. But it's also really sophisticated storytelling, because the author, by the end of the story, weaves all the loose ends back in again. It couldn't have been told in one go. At least you'd have to be a storyteller with a lot of stamina. I reckon that my best telling of it so far, within one period, I think it was 3.5 hours. So that's a lot to fit into time. And I don't know how often and how practical that would be in any point in your life. I mean, I know there are cases where they talk about the epics and so on, where people are sitting for hours. But in courtly life, I don't know. But it does seem possible that there are 3 ways or 2 ways you can divvy up the story. But either way, the teller was clearly aware that people might want to know what happened to characters earlier on, and fills in all the details for you. So that's what drew me into it. It's a real love affair. Jaufre himself, he's a bit of a sanctimonious prig. He's always got to know who's right and who's wrong. He only fights if he thinks the person's right. But at the same time, he's got a sense of humour. And that brings me on to the final thing that fascinates me is the main characters, certainly the 2 main characters, have actually got an inner life. You could imagine meeting them and having you hear what they think as well as knowing what they do, and that's relatively unusual as well for this time period. So the other thing that I found was more intriguing than I expected was to find that the story itself had a story. I've said that we've got these 2 manuscripts from the 13th and 14th century. But in addition to that, and the fragments, the story went on. So there's a bit of a time lag, But the next time it appears in print is in 1510. So shortly after the printing presses get going, and we have chapbooks. And suddenly there is a chapbook version. And this chapbook version has a few differences. Now, one of the theories I have is that it could be a different version of the story that was always around, and that the person who wrote the medieval version took that story and elaborated on it. But it could also be that the story just got simplified and slightly altered the way things do when you're telling stories. But the chapbook version, first of all, the fun thing is the villain of the piece suddenly gets to be center stage. So instead of it being the story, there isn't a title, I must say, on Jaufre, on the manuscript. So I've made up my title. So maybe it was always called something else. But the chapbook version is very definitely the story of Tablante de Ricamonte, who should be Taulat de Rogemont in the medieval version. But this is now Castilian Spanish, and it's Tablante de Ricamonte. And then Jaufre gets second billing further down. Things have changed in the story. There's a lot less of some of the dialogues between the two lovers. There's a lot less of, and various events, just, there's no magic really coming into it. And there's also a rather odd thing where it appears to be a different Arthur. It's not the same King Arthur as we had before. There's a few things like that, and it's quite intriguing how it's changed. But those chapbooks about Tablante de Ricamonte, first of all, turn up in Cervantes. He mentions them in Don Quixote as being on the Don's library shelf. And then it stays in print in various versions until the early 20th century. So that takes it, 600 years of the story staying in print. There are variations that come in, but there it is. A version of the story turns up in another chapbook, which I find also totally intriguing. It turns up in France, and this is in French, and it's what we call a mashup today. It's a mixture of the story of Jaufre, who's called Geoffrey in the story Jaufre, and also of what we call the Belle Inconnue story, the fair unknown. And the author mixes up. It's Claude Platin is the author's name in this case, and he basically does a chapter or two of one, chapter or two of the other, and keeps going. Some of the character names characters have been renamed within Jaufre, but what is also intriguing is that when I looked at the French, I realized a lot of it is a direct translation from one of the two manuscripts, because I know the text well enough now that I recognize it. So Claude Platin, who was working in Lyon in 1530, had a copy of the manuscript. And I'd love to know, was it the one we have in the Bibliothèque Nationale? Was it a different one? What happened to it? How did he come to have it? I meant to say amongst the manuscripts that among the manuscript bits that is almost the most intriguing thing I came across relatively recently was they found some scraps from the Jewish community in Toledo written in a Hebraic script that seemed to be transliterating Catalan Spanish. So these are the idea that the story has moved from being Occitan and the court of Aragon, which was also Catalonia, so Catalan Occitan, but then it moved over to the Jewish community as well. You probably know that Spain at this time in the 12th and 13th century was a real melting pot of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And they did mix and mingle. How well they got on depends on which bit of history you're reading. But it's just intriguing to me that this story moved around in Iberia hugely, only briefly got into France in the 16th century. And then eventually in the 19th century, we see it appearing in some rather bad, very heavy-handed adaptations. One in French called Le Chevalier Jaufre et la Belle Brunisende, and then it became in English, Jaufre the Knight and the Fair Brunisende. In answer to your question, Kathleen, yes, I have seen the manuscripts. It was one of the great high points of my research, was going to the Bibliothèque Nationale and being able to actually work my way through one of the manuscripts. One of the manuscripts, the earlier one, has got the most wonderfully awful illustrations. And I'll show you some of those in a moment. But it was the kind of drawings that I would do. whereas the other one doesn't have the illustrations, but it does have some magnificent, it's decorated initials. So then in the 19th century, it came to France, and then then eventually into England. And then the next time it appears is in an absolutely dreadful 1930s version by somebody whose name has just gone from me, and I will have it back in a moment or two. But it was done for a collection of stories for American young men, or boys, actually, not young men. And it's full of archaisms, like he bent upon the king a look of burning desire withal. And so it was, it's overdone to the point of ridiculousness. And then the next thing is 1980s, there's a proper translation done by Ross Arthur. And apart from a few adaptations by John Matthews, mostly based on the translations, there's not really been anything else done. In answer to your question, Christina, no, I think what it is, it's a version of Catalan Spanish, but put in Hebraic. Certainly the scholar who did it didn't refer to Latino. She talked about it as being a version of Catalan. So I don't quite know. I'm not a specialist on that at all, but that's what she said. So as I say, it's had an interesting journey, but what I find intriguing beyond measure is, why did it not get to this country? What happened along the way? So if I'm going to put up a couple of pictures to show you while I grab a quick drink of water, and show you. Okay, that is a scene from an early part of the story. And you see the girl with her hair. That's how I would do a girl with her hair myself. You'll find out, this is King Arthur, by the way, in case you're wondering. Find another one. Again, I've had great fun today trying to test what this computer will do with Zoom. Oh yeah, so that's the one I wanted, I think. Where's it gone? Where's it gone? No, yes, there we go, finally. Okay, this is the first page of the manuscript that I worked from. So these are my photographs. So this is the beginning part of the story. And that word should be d'encounter, shouldn't it? I've lost my page. But anyway, yes, those are the words. It does work out. And then here, this is a smaller piece. So you can see what they call a lettrine, which is a decorated initial. And underneath it, you might be able to see some grey writing. And what I found was that the scribe or somebody had actually added little notes so that it would sometimes clarify who was speaking. So presumably if anyone was actually reading it, they would find out who they should be, whose voice they should be doing, or if it wasn't entirely clear where we got to in the story, then that was going on. So my research was in two main parts. And the first part was where I started from, which was saying to my supervisors, one of whom was Sinead Davis, who did the translations of the Mabinogion most recently. What I wanted to do was tell the story in English and find out how it worked as a piece of storytelling today in English to English audiences. And so that was a large part of it, and I had to find ways of getting to different audiences and try and tell it and finding out what would fit into what format. And I quickly found that I could do quite well, because there are certain episodes, as I will demonstrate to you later, which can stand on their own. And then I also found some places where they very kindly gave me 2 slots where I could do 2 halves of the story. And I did a telling here to a very small audience to see if I could tell the whole thing in an evening. And I did, but I found that I'd missed out lots of bits along the way, and it was tiring for the audience as well as me. So I'm not sure that it was a good, I don't really want to do it that way again. I have tried doing truncated versions of the story all in one go, and I just feel I'm on an express train trying to cover everything, and you miss part of the subtlety that way. So that was side of it. And then out of the blue, really, my supervisor said to me, we want you to take a stand on what you think the dating was, because then you can make some other informed comments. Now, the dating, as you probably gathered from what I said earlier, you've got about 100 years in which it could be put, and every single contender for the possible King of Aragon has been thoroughly discussed and either just disregarded or favoured by a vast number of scholars. They've taken different methods. Somebody looked at things like whether you could compare the style of this to a prayer that was said here, or a sermon that was said here, or whether you could take the description of the king, of the hero, and make it the description of a particular king. Or my favourite was a German whose name was Pinkerhoff, I think, Pinkernel, and he looked at what day of the week our hero is doing something, and then tried to, and this is all happening after Pentecost, and then trying to relate that to actual calendars of the time to see what year it was happening, which I just think is so wacko. It's just wonderful that he would spend so long on it, but ultimately it doesn't get you very far, because this is a fantasy. This is not a real thing. So there are three possible kings. There's, in order of further back, you've got Alfonso, you've got Peter, and you've got James. So Alfonso is I always get muddled up in my Alfonsos. I think he's Alfonso II. There's Peter I, and there's James I of Aragon. Now, one of the issues that comes up with all this all the time when there's doing this research was you're working through at least three languages. So the kings have got a name in French, which is often where the books are written. You've got a name in Spanish, and you've got a name in Catalan or Occitan. And so just to give you a flavour of it, Alfonso is pretty straightforward. The only thing that changes is whether you put an F or a PH in there. But Peter can be Pierre, and he can be Pedro, or he can be Pietro in some cases. And then James can be James, or Jaime, or Jaume, or Jacques, and so on. So the three kings, Alfonso, Peter, James, they were in fact grandfather, father, and son. And I was thinking, well, how do you go about sorting this out? Because all of them could be validly described. There's little bits in the story about he did this, he had a wonderful victory against those who would deny God, for example. That's one thing. But then they all did that because they were all fighting to push back the boundaries of Aragon against the Moorish Caliphate, who were in the other parts of Spain. And finally, I found myself taking a different stance. As a storyteller, I thought, who would be listening to this story? Who, apart from the king, would be listening to the story? So I thought, okay, who are they married to? And that's where I had my eureka moment, because James I of Aragon had a first wife who's almost disregarded by history. But he was married to her when he was I think he was 15, and she was ever so old. She was 22, I think. But she was called Leonor, and Leonor is the Catalan version of the name Eleanor. And this Eleanor was the daughter of Eleanor of Castile, and Eleanor of Castile was the daughter of Alienor, or Eleanor, of Aquitaine, and Henry II of England. And all of a sudden, it all made sense, because for those of you who don't know this, some of you I know do know this, but Eleanor and Henry and their extended family were largely responsible for spreading all the stories about King Arthur all the way across Europe. And this meant that Leonor not only had a mother who was Queen of Castile, she had, I'm going to get myself totally bogged down here now trying to do this without all my props, but her uncle was one uncle was Richard Coeur de Lion. One aunt was Queen of Sicily, Joan. One aunt was, I'll have to come back to the other aunts in a minute. But another uncle was, oddly enough, called Geoffrey. He was Geoffrey of Brittany. Now, Jaufre, Geoffrey, it's the same name. And Geoffrey of Brittany is called Jaufre by the troubadours in their poems. And he's associated with the wonderful forest of Broceliande, or Brocelianda, which features, oddly enough, in Jaufre, around the castle of King Arthur. And Geoffrey in Brittany, of course, had a son called Arthur. If you know your Shakespeare, you'll know he was treated badly by King John, but we don't need to worry about John because he doesn't really come into this. The description of Jaufre as he arrives is entirely the same, or nearly entirely the same, as a description of Richard Coeur de Lion. Admittedly, these are standard ways to describe a hero, but it is noticeable how closely it fits, including the fact that he, actually, I'll come back to this. He's wearing a circle of flowers on his head, which is a bit odd. But again, if you think of the Plantagenets, if you know about your Plantagenet history, their grandfather, he was Geoffrey of Anjou, and he was the first of the Plantagenets. They were called Plantagenets supposedly because he plucked, I'm getting into trouble here with my language, he picked a branch of the genêt, of the broom, and put it in his helmet to distinguish him in battle for who he was. And so there are other explanations of the name Plantagenet, mind you, which are a bit ruder, but I'm not going into those. I'm just stick with flowers for the moment, keep it nice and clean. So it is entirely possible and very plausible, just on a very superficial reading, that this is destined to be for a descendant of Eleanor and Henry II of England. And it makes entire sense about why you would write a story about King Arthur for a king of Aragon, because he was married to the descendant, and in addition to that, writing in Occitan because Eleanor of Aquitaine and her family spoke Occitan as a first language. Richard Coeur de Lion wrote troubadour poems. This all fits completely. Even the bit about my underwater fairy in Sicily, Joan, who was Queen of Sicily, and her husband William were the sponsors for a writer called Gervase of Tilbury. Gervase of Tilbury is one of the reasons we know about the story, where they find Arthur sleeping in a cave under Etna and being looked after by Morgan Le Fay. So to my mind, I don't need to do any more proving. I think I've got it pretty much sus, but there's a lot more as well, because this underwater fairy is under siege by an enemy and has to be rescued by Jaufre. And oddly enough, Joan of Sicily, after her husband died, was under siege, and Richard Coeur de Lion went down to rescue her. This is all documented history. I'm not making a word of it up. So it's quite satisfying to suddenly find your theory which completely fits the facts. It would mean that the probable date, in my mind at least, for it to be written was 1225. And I'm saying that because in 1225, James I of Aragon tried his best to besiege a Muslim stronghold in the south of Spain called Peñíscola, and it was actually turned out to be a pretty awful defeat. But he, in the earlier part of the year, he was drumming up support for an army to join him. And it strikes me as being very likely, as this story is set around Pentecost, it strikes me as likely that it was told around Pentecost to remind everyone what a good king James was and why don't we join him. And there's one more wonderful thing that I found as I went through. James I of Aragon left us his memoirs, and he probably dictated them. I don't suppose he wrote them down, but his tone of voice at times is entirely like Jaufre. He wants to know if people are right or if they're wrong. He feels he's on a mission from God, which Jaufre does from time to time. And it just sounds like his voice. And I think amongst the other wonderful attributes for this author is he has an ability to mimic a tone of voice. There's a bit of churchmen speaking when at a point where they think Jaufre is dead, and the sententiousness of the speech sounds like so many rather heavy-handed church people I've heard speaking, and we must remember how God sent his son, and so on. And I think what the author does in several places, he mimics the style of speech that people would recognize, and then he takes it on to a new level. So there's so many more stories behind all of this. So when I looked into the life story of James I of Aragon, there's a whole backstory about what his father and his mother, and it connects to Byzantium, it connects to all sorts of extraordinary things, the sort of things that it's probably not particularly unknown to people who come from Mediterranean Europe. But for somebody like myself who's brought up with Welsh history and English history, to suddenly discover all these extraordinary stories of people being rejected on and people trying to remarry when they already had a living partner. You know, it's just a whole lot of other things to tell you, which are all in the book. So again, I'll just have a quick look here. Just checking if there's any other message that I missed. No, I think that's it. Right, so again, just sharing a screen or two. Some of you, when you were coming in, I think it was probably only Mike, I had this up. This castle, which is north of Zaragoza, called Loire. And when we went there, we went to Zaragoza because we had to. I'll tell you about Zaragoza. But this castle fits the bill for the heroine's castle. It's exactly the way it's described in the thing. So I think that's where I imagine my heroine living. And then, what else have I got to show you here? Oh yeah, just to give you a bit more of an example of the really not very wonderful drawings. There we have a battle going on between Jaufre, who's in full armour, and a leper. You can tell he's a leper because he's got spots. I have to be careful when I'm telling this story in case people think I say leopard, but I don't. He is a leper. He's not only a leper, he's actually a giant, which you can't tell from that picture. But he hasn't got a sword, he's got a club, because that's what giants have, is they have clubs. The other thing about Jaufre is, as well as all the Arthurian stuff, there's a lot of almost fairy tale stuff that comes in there as well. So what am I going to talk to you about now? So the two books. You've got the two books here. This one is about the research, and this one is the actual story. The one about the research is thicker because there's a lot in there. But I had some wonderful help with the putting together the adaptation, because Maria was able to come and help with the illustrations. Maria sat through a telling and did the illustrations. Let me just show you one of her. So I showed you Arthur and the Beast before, which is how it appears in the medieval one. And then I will show you Maria's version, which I think is fab and absolutely true to the way it should be. And there's Arthur dealing with the beast. And what is funny is the 19th century adaptation in French has illustrations by Gustave Doré, and I have no idea what he was on when he did the illustrations, but they bear very little relationship to the way the story tells it. And the beast for Doré is like this huge coiled dragon with wings, and it's coiled up on a cliff, and it's nothing at all like the story. But there we are, that's what happens. So would you like to have some questions now, or you can't all answer me, of course. If you have any questions or any comments, please put them in the chat. What I was going to do was introduce you to, I'm not sure whether to tell the story first and then introduce you to Maria, or whether to introduce you to Maria and then do the stories. So somebody put something in the chat, maybe Maria put something in the chat to tell me what you think would work best. And in the meantime, I will show you one more screen while we're trying to get ourselves organized for this. This is the trouble, you're all so wonderfully quiet. Yeah, I'll just show you. This is the cover, the first page of the 1510 chapbook from Spain. So you can see there you've got Joffre, hijo el conde Donazon. When I was talking about the mashup version, I didn't mean to do that. There we are. The mashup version. One of the extraordinary things about the mashup was that for many years people didn't realize it was the story of Jaufre, because they recognized the name of. So Jaufre is called Jaufre, the son of Dauvon, and Dauvon is one of the names of the knights of Charlemagne. it's nothing to do with it. It's like just one of those, like the name Smith. Or it's not as common as Smith, but it's one of those coincidences. It's not actually significant. And so for some reason, the person who wrote this story down called him Geoffroy de Mayence, who was another one of Charlemagne's warriors. And so it all got put in with the Chanson de Roland instead of being its own story. And people didn't realize it was about King Arthur. So it was all very confusing indeed. And okay, Maria says, okay. Okay. So let's hear from Maria first, and then I will do the stories. So let's find Maria so I can spotlight Maria. No. Okay. Okay, Maria, you can unmute yourself, darling.
Yeah, I was trying to. Hello.
Hello, nice to see you.
And you. Sorry about the panic earlier, not being able to find the link. Got there in the end. So
tell me about, yeah.
Shall I just explain briefly what I did to everybody? So, so basically, I had never heard the story before. I'd obviously heard Anne talking a lot about the story, and I was actually quite ill at the time. So I was holed up at home, and Anne offered to tell the story of an evening. So great. And as I began listening to it, I just had to get out the sketchbook and start drawing. So it wasn't planned, was it? It was just spontaneous. And because I started to take notes and then I just wanted to draw. So the drawing you just saw and show you, this is the original version. And what I did after I had done all the drawings, and I then imported them onto my iPad and I redid them using a drawing application on the iPad, so they became digital images. So I reworked all of those afterwards, and that took a couple of months to do that. But the original sketches were all done in one evening, and I didn't revisit the story and redo them or anything. I had no idea if I was capturing the best moments, because I was just drawing as fast as possible. And of course, I'm listening. It's like a instant translation, simultaneous translation. I'm listening and drawing and listening. So some of the images were capturing multiple events, I suppose. So it's not traditional illustration, which is where you would know the text very well and try and pull something out that encapsulates the text. It was performance drawing. So all the drawings that emerged out of that were performed and are performed and then were reworked as drawings in their own right on the iPad. And we sent some over to the publisher, and we thought they'd only use 4 or 5, didn't we, Anne? And then in the end, they used them all, I think. I think there were 19 in all, so they used them all, which was very nice. So they were just simple line drawings, because that was one of the things for the publisher. Here's another of the originals. I don't know if you can see those okay. But it was fascinating to go back into them. And what was amazing is when I'm drawing stories, I do feel like I can hear them better. I listen better because I'm drawing and having to translate. But when I looked at the images later, I couldn't remember the story. So I had to just work with them as images. And so it'll be really lovely to take in the story in a slower pace with the book, because the book has only arrived recently. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Okay, I think that's enough from me, isn't it? So are there any questions about that, or do I have to look at the chat at the same time? It's hard on this iPad.
Has anyone got any questions for Maria? I'm briefly unmuting, and then I shall mute again in case there are.
I'm assuming people could unmute to ask a question.
Either that. Oh, there we go.
Oh. Was there one character I really loved? check the drawings. To draw, you mean? I'm assuming you mean to draw. I quite enjoyed the Beast when he appeared. I liked him, but he went away quite quickly. and I just enjoyed the main character Jaufre as he progressed through the tale, and then some of the women. So the women start coming in, and they're a lot softer to draw. And what else did I like? I like these sort of multiple things happening all at once. Someone drowning. I think that was under the water bit, was it? And then birds flying over. Yeah, I can't really remember. I love the whole thing. I love that, absolutely being in the moment with the story, trying to get as much of it down on paper as I can. So I don't have time, as it were, to fall in love with one bit over the other. I just have to go for it and get excited about all of it. And then there'll be bits I'll hear and I'll go, oh, I haven't got time for that. Moving on. There's a lot in that story. It's very complicated, but it was very exciting. And you know how Anne remembered it all, I do not know.
Well, in fact, it's by the time you spent as many hours on it as I have, you remember it. It stays with you. But yeah. Thank you, Maria. That was great.
I'm not that kind of performer. I have to be in it. Yeah. My memory's awful.
Right. Well, thanks very much. So I'm
very welcome.
Find a way to. Oh God. I wish I'd got I should have arranged a tech advisor for this, really. What have I got? Where have you gone? I've lost you. There we are. Okay. I'm removing your spotlight. Okay. So I'm going to tell you 3 episodes, and they're 3 that I've done a lot with along the way. One of them you've already seen the illustration for. And I would also just say about the women, the wonderful thing about Jaufre is the women are to be reckoned with. They are good, strong characters, and maybe surprisingly so. So the heroine is rich and independent and feisty, and the fairy underwater, she might need rescuing from this invader, but she actually doesn't need a lot of. I'm puzzled about why she needs helping, because she seems to know what she's doing. And then there's a few other women along the way. The queen, in one of the other distinguishing features about Jaufre, which is really intriguing, is the queen is not called Guinevere or any name quite like it. She's called Guillaumier. And to my knowledge, that's the only time she's called that anywhere. But it's very definitely Guillaumier. I've seen it in the manuscripts. It's the way it's spelt. And so that's a bit of a mystery. Okay. Ooh, bit of a noise there. Right, you probably aren't getting it, but I've got a cat who's snoring on the side there. But luckily, he's not getting in the way. So the story starts, and you've heard the beginning part, but our story opens in Pentecost, at Pentecost, at Arthur's castle, which is located in Carduel. Now, it could be Carlisle, it might be Carlion, we don't know, but in Carduel is where it is. It's probably Carlisle. And Arthur is holding his normal Pentecost feast, and everyone is there. All of the people that you would know are there. So, for example, there's Eric there, the very well-mannered Eric. There's Tristan, there's Lancelot, there's Yvain, and there's, I'm just trying to think of all the names now. There's Gawain, of course there's Gawain. And Caradoc's strong arm, he's there. They're all sitting around and they're talking and they're discussing adventures and talking about what they've been up to. And eventually Sir Kay comes through the room with his apple wand as his staff of office. And he said, it's about time we had something to eat. And he turns to Arthur and says, shall we call people in to eat? And Arthur turns on him and he said, you know that's not what we do round here. You know we have a custom that before we have anything to eat, we have to have an adventure. And we haven't had an adventure, so we can't eat yet. So everyone went back to their talking, and again, time went past, and they began to get quite hungry. And after a while, even Arthur realized that this was going on a bit long. So he said, we will go and find our own adventure. And he gave orders for everyone to saddle up and get whatever they needed, men and women, all saddle up, take their equipment, and they would ride into the forest of Broceliande, which surrounded the castle. And so they rode down the forest track for some distance. And then, in the distance, they heard a woman crying for help. And Arthur called everyone to stop, and they listened carefully. It was indeed a woman in distress calling for help. So Arthur said, right, leave this to me. I will sort this out myself. And Gawain said, well, surely we should go with you. He said, no, I will do this on my own. You wait here. And Arthur rode through the woods, through the trees, for some distance, until he came to a riverbank. And on the riverbank, there was a mill. And outside the mill, there was a woman tearing her hair with grief, rending her clothes with absolute distress. She said, oh, my Lord, help me. A beast has come down from the mountain and he's eating all my grain. What am I to do? And Arthur said, leave this to me, my lady. And he strode manfully or kingfully into the mill. And there indeed was the beast. It had its muzzle into the grain hopper, and it was chomping away. It was huge. It was bigger than an ox. It had red, shaggy fur. It had long, spindly legs. It had great big teeth, and it had huge horns. And so Arthur, first of all, tried commanding the beast to move, but it wouldn't move. So then he went round to the back of the beast and pushed the beast. Didn't budge. He took the flat of his sword and hit the beast across the rump. The beast didn't move. So then he caught hold of the horns, and he tugged, and he tugged. He couldn't get the beast to move at all. But then the beast raised his head, and Arthur realized he couldn't let go of the horns. And the beast stood up and began walking out of the mill. He ambled quite slowly, very deliberately, through the woods with Arthur hanging from his horns. Well, after a bit, they came to a clearing where the other knights were waiting, and when they saw what was happening, they cried out with an immense, and they got themselves ready to with their bows and arrows. And Arthur said, no, don't do anything. I don't think the beast means me any harm. I think it's fine. Just let me be. And so the beast continued its way through the forest. Everyone was lamenting what would happen if the king met his end. What were they going to do? The death of chivalry. Everything would just fall apart. And Sir Kay, who caught sight of things, was so distressed he fell backwards off his horse. And then the beast came to a big rock, and he climbed up the rock, and he bent his head. And now Arthur was hanging from the horns over a great drop. And of course everyone was panicking. Nobody knew what to do. And eventually Gawain had a bright idea. He said, what we'll do, he needs a soft landing. Strip off. Everyone, take all your clothes off, every bit of it, softest tissue is closest to the skin. So everything, make a big pile, and we'll save him if we can. So the entire court stripped naked, and they made a huge pile of clothes. And then the beast moved slightly, and they realized it was in the wrong place. But then the beast put his four hooves together and jumped into the center of the group. And Arthur realized he was free and he was safe, and he was surrounded by naked courtiers. And he looked around and said, what on earth are you doing? And the beast, meanwhile, had transformed himself into a handsome knight, one of Arthur's best knights, who'd been practicing magic in his spare time and was dressed in very smart scarlet clothing. And he said, there we are, Arthur, you made me a wager that I could not transform myself in the sight of the whole court. And if I did, you would reward me with a kiss from the maiden of my choice and a fine gilt cup. And Gawain said, my dear sir, you have magicked us clean out of our clothes. So everybody decided it was time to go back to Carduel to have their feast. And they all picked clothes from the pile whatever came first to hand. So in a very motley selection of clothes, they made their way back to Cardua, where they started to have their feast. But just as they were sitting to eat, in came a young man riding on a pack horse. And the young man was dressed in a shimmering brown coat and hose to match. And his skin was reddened from the skin, but he had blondish hair, and on his head he had a circle of flowers. He was a very finely made young man. And as he approached the king, he jumped from his horse, he went up to the king and knelt down, and he said, "My lord, I've come to ask you to make me a knight and to grant me a boon." And the king said, "Well, all in good time. We're about to have some food. Go and sit down, have some food, then we'll talk about it." So the young man went to his place. And no sooner had he sat down, there was a crash, and into the hall this time came a knight in full armour on a proper war horse. And he rode right up to King Arthur, and with his lance he speared a knight completely through and dropped the dead body in front of the king and queen. He said, "My name is Taulat de Rogimon, and I will do this every year until someone stops me." And he turned and he rode out of the hall. There was a complete silence until the young man who just come in said, "I think that would be my job. I would like you to make me a knight, King Arthur, and I would like the job of sorting that man out for you." And the king said, "You haven't had enough to drink yet, have you? Have a bit more to drink, and then we'll see how really brave you are." And the young man turned to Kay and said, "You'll be sorry you said that." But to the king he said, "I'm serious." And the king said, You're very young. How could you possibly take on this man? I wouldn't send one of my best men to meet him because he's very fierce." And Jaufre said, "You did say you would give me a boon." And the king sighed and said, "Oh, very well, but first we must make you a knight. What is your name?" He said, "My name is Jaufre, the son of Dauvon." "Dauvon," said the king. "He was one of my finest men. He died in Normandy." "You are welcome, Jaufre, but I wish you wouldn't take this on." And he now knighted Jaufre, and they gave Jaufre some proper armour, and they gave him a better horse. And Jaufre, kitted out, set off on the adventure to meet Taulat. So that's how our story starts. And you can already see that this isn't quite the way stories normally start, and that Jaufre is already, what can I say, he's not quite following the path. He's a bit similar, if you know the story of Perceval, he's a bit similar to Perceval, but he knows his manners, unlike Perceval. Anyway, I'm going to fast forward quite a bit now, because it is a long story, and it has lots of adventures along the way. But at this point in the story, so I missed out the important thing, always happens, that Jaufre said that he wouldn't eat or sleep until he had done what he needed to do. And so off he goes in search of Taulat, and he has various adventures. He meets up with another knight called Estut de Foy, and Estut has a set, rather usefully, has some invincible armour. And when Jaufre has defeated him, he can have the armour. So that does give him a bit of advantage because he's got this decent suit of armour on. And then, as I say, he meets up with this knight who has the lance in the tree. He meets up with a rather unpleasant mercenary soldier who is very nasty indeed. And then we come to this point of the story. And it's very hot. It's so hot, and Jaufre is so tired. He's just riding along, wondering what to do, can't get his thoughts in order, when all of a sudden, running towards him, because it's only him and his horse, running towards him, there is a young squire. And the young squire is dishevelled, he's got his clothes rent, he's got his hair in disorder. He said, "Run, run, run as fast as you can, get away from here, run!" And Jaufre said, "Why would I do that?" And the squire said, "Don't ask questions, just run. I haven't got time to tell you, just run. If you value your life, run away." And Jaufre said, "Why? What's going on?" And Geoffrey said, and the young man said, I haven't got time to tell you, just run, run, run. And Geoffrey said, look, as far as I can work out, you're telling me to run away because you're frightened of something. But I don't know what you're frightened of. And the young man said, I haven't got time to tell you. I haven't got time to tell you about the way I was riding with my mistress and my lord, and how they were the kindest people in the world, and how beautiful she was and everything. And I haven't got time to tell you how they were attacked by this monstrous, horrible giant. And I haven't got time to tell you how he killed my master and he's taken my mistress, and I don't know what to do. And Jaufre was just about to answer when, running past them, coming from behind, came a leper, and he's carrying a baby under his arm. And he's being followed at great speed by a woman who's shouting, my baby, he's got my baby, rescue my baby, get my baby back for me. And Jaufre said, that's your baby. Yes, she said, that's my baby. So, you're the mother of the... Yes, I'm the mother of the baby. Why did he take the baby? I don't know, said the mother. I don't know, he just took my baby. And Jaufre said, don't worry about it. It seems like you're in the right and he's in the wrong. So I will get your baby back, dead or alive. Don't worry. And he followed the leper. And as the leper realized he was being followed, the leper turned and gave Jaufre a very rude gesture with his hand. And then he disappeared inside a house. So Jaufre left his horse and most of his armor with the woman and the squire, and he went into the house. And inside, it was much bigger than you might have thought. And lying on a bed was a man who was groping a young woman who was in floods of tears and trying to get away. And the giant, the man, I should have said, but he is a giant, would rip this girl's clothing. And as he saw Jaufre coming in, he swung his legs out of the bed and stood up. And Jaufre realized he was indeed a giant. And the giant said, what have you come here for? Have you come seeking your doom? And Jaufre said, no, I've come to rescue a child. Have you seen the child? And the giant picks up a club by the bed and starts to swing it around him. And Jaufre is trying to fight him. And of course, he's much smaller and he's having to swipe upwards with his sword. And at one point, he manages to swipe a whole chunk of flesh off the giant's leg. And what I should have said and didn't say was the giant was indeed a leper. And he had all the classic signs of leprosy. And one of the things about this book that is quite intriguing is how that is medically correct for the time, was how this description of leprosy. And so Jaufre carries on, and the giant is fuming. And as he swings this club, it knocks the pillars of the house, so the whole house is shaking. And Jaufre is darting from side to side, and finally manages to cut the giant's leg off at the knee. And the giant falls. And as he falls, Jaufre is able to bring his sword down on the giant's head and kill him. But the giant's good leg kicks out and sends Jaufre flying across the room and bangs his head against one of the pillars. Now the maiden has been praying all this time, and when she sees that the giant is dead, she goes across to Jaufre. And when she sees that he's lying completely still, she takes off his helmet and she fills that with cold water and pours it over Jaufre's head. And Jaufre slowly comes to, but he's still really not in charge of himself at all. And he starts laying around him with his arms, thinking he's holding his sword. And it's just as what he wasn't, or he would have killed the young woman. But he then backs into a corner, completely convinced that he's being attacked. And the young woman approaches him and said, kind sir, sweet sir, look around you. The giant is dead. You have saved me. Thank you. And Jaufre slowly realizes what's going on. But then he thinks, but the child, where's the child? What happened to that baby? And he starts running around the room again, a bit like a madman, trying every door, trying every window, but nothing is opening. And he sinks to his knees on the floor and he starts to pray. He said, God, why did you send me here if I couldn't help anyone? Why am I so useless? Why can't I do what I need to do? Now, I won't do it now, But I would just say briefly, in the story as we have it in the medieval text, there's a little interlude here where the narrator suddenly breaks off and starts talking about how dreadful things are these days and the standards have dropped and no one behaves the way they ought to. And then, for no apparent reason, then suddenly says, but do you want me to go on with the story? And if I was doing this live, I would probably do that, and I'd give you the chance to say yes, please, or no, thank you, or whatever. But you'd probably say yes, please. But it's a very mysterious little interruption in the story. I'm just mentioning it. And I have broken the story. But Jaufre suddenly hears the sound of children's voices. And he rushes to it, and he sees there's a door in the wall he hadn't seen before. He still can't open it, but he puts his shoulder to it, bursts through. And there is the leper he first saw, holding a child above a pot of blood, with a knife in his hand, ready to slit the child's throat. And Jaufre, quick as he could, slices the leper's hand off with holding the knife. And it's also the hand that made the rude gesture. He said, that'll teach you to make rude gestures at people. And the leper immediately falls to his knees and said, my master told me to do this. He said that the blood of the babies would cure his leprosy. And Jaufre said, your master is dead. So now we need to get out of here. How do we get out of this house? And the leper said, well, you can't. It's protected by a magic charm. There's no way you can get out of this house unless I tell you. But I could only tell you if you'd make sure I stayed alive. And Jaufre said, very well, tell me what I have to do. And the leper said, it's dangerous. So you should make sure everyone else is sheltered away from here. And so Jaufre finds places where they can hide. And he said, now take that head off the shelf and break it with your sword, and then take cover. So Jaufre puts this very well-made head of a boy on the table, slices it with his sword, and as he does so, there is the most tremendous roll of thunder. It is so powerful that the whole house shakes, and then comes the rain, and that hammers down, and every single tile and shingle on the roof, every single beam in the house starts shaking, falling apart, and then the wind comes up, and the storm thunders down. Jaufre is hiding under a table with a shield over his head, and the storm is so great that a whistling wind comes, and suddenly the whole house is blown apart. And there's no sign that anything was there before, except for the table under which Jaufre is sheltering, and where the children and the woman and the squire are sheltering as well. And the maiden comes up to him and said, are you all right, my lord? And he said, I'll just sit here for a moment or two, if that's all right. But he said, you and the leper and the mother and the babies, take yourselves to King Arthur. Tell King Arthur what's happened, and tell him I am still alive and I'm still looking for Taulat. So Jaufre picks himself up, dusts himself off, gets on his horse, and he rides on. And this episode comes straight after it, so I'm going to go straight into it, and then I'm going to end at the end of this episode. And I think, yeah, that should be about right. I'll just check the time. So Jaufre carries on writing. He is, of course, more than exhausted by this time. He is absolutely at the end of his powers. And he doesn't know where he's going anymore. He's got no idea. The bang on his head, the bruising from everything landing on top of him from this house. He's really in a bit of a bad way. But as he rides along, he suddenly can smell the most beautiful perfume on the air. And he can hear birdsong. And he realizes he's coming to a walled garden. And he opens the gate. And inside the walled garden, there is every kind of flower, of tree, every kind of fruit and blossom you could possibly imagine, and lush green grass growing, and the birds singing in the trees. And Jaufre thinks, I'm going to have to sleep here, and the horse can have some good grass to eat, but I have got to sleep. And so he lays down on his shield, and within seconds, he's fast asleep. But you'll probably realise that a garden like that belongs to somebody. And indeed it belonged to the lady of the castle, which was above the garden. And that lady, her name was Brunesen. She was the most beautiful woman you could ever have imagined. She had the most beautiful complexion, like a snow on a beautiful branch on a spring day. She had the most beautiful eyes. She had a little look to her brows, a little line of brown that was just delicate and sweet. And every time you looked at her, it looked as if she was about to kiss you. So she was absolutely stunning. And she was clever. And she was rich, because this wasn't her only castle. She had many others. But she was all alone because her family had all gone. She was surrounded by young people and other people of taste. She was surrounded by people who loved music and poetry and dancing, and they amused themselves quite well. But there was a strange affliction to this land, which was that 3 times a day and 3 times a night, everyone had to stop what they were doing and lament. And so this is what happened. Everyone would stop what they were doing and weep and wail and just completely lose themselves in grief until there was another signal they could stop. Now, Brunesen found it hard to get back to sleep after one of these events, and so she relied on the birds in her garden to lull her back to sleep once she'd been woken up. And so on this particular evening, she realised the birds had stopped singing. And so she called her seneschal and said, "Go down and find out who is in my garden, who has stopped the bird singing, and then deal with them. Basically, hang them, get out of here." And so the seneschal made his way downstairs, and he saw Jaufre lying on his shield, fast asleep. And he tried to wake Jaufre, to begin with very gently, but it took a lot more than gentleness. It took a lot of shaking to get him to wake up. And finally, Jaufre did wake up. And he said, who are you? What's the problem? And the senator said, "You can't stay here. I have to take you upstairs because this castle owns the garden. You're disturbing the birds." And Jaufre said, "Really? I'm not doing any harm. I haven't damaged anything. I haven't stolen anything. I haven't done anything." "Nevertheless," said the seneschal, "I've got my orders." "Oh, really?" said Jaufre. "I just want to sleep. The horse is eating a bit of grass, but it's only one horse." "I tell you what," said Jaufre, "if I fight you, and if I win, will you let me sleep? If I lose, you can take me wherever you need to take me, but just let me sleep." And the seneschal, thinking this can't be much of a battle, he saw the state Jaufre was in. He thought, "This is not going to be a battle. I might as well just go along with it." So he got his horse and he got himself ready, and he rode. The 2 knights rode towards each other, and with one flick of the wrist, Jaufre unseated the seneschal. And the seneschal made his way back up the stairs. And when Brunesen saw him coming, she said, "Where is he? Where is the intruder?" And the seneschal said, "You know, he's a very fine young man, so I let him sleep." "You did what?" said Brunesen. "Well, I didn't think it would do any harm. I just let him sleep." "I told you to bring him to me. Is there somebody else who can do the job?" And up at the back of the room stood Simon the Red. Now, Simon the Red fancied himself a bit, and he had very fine armour. He said, "I'll sort him out for you, my lady. Don't worry about that." And so he went down the stairs, clanging as he went. And when he saw Jaufre asleep, he didn't bother with too many niceties. He shoved him quite hard to wake him up. And Jaufre came to himself, and he saw a man in armour. He thought it was the same one. He said, "Look, we had a deal. We had an arrangement. You said I could sleep." "Stand up and fight if you must," said Simon the Red. So Jaufre said, "Okay, on the basis that if I knock you off your horse, you let me sleep." And Simon the Red said, "You're not going to knock me off my horse, but for the sake of argument." And so they rode at each other, and again, one flick of his wrist, and Simon the Red was unhorsed. And he went up the stairs rather more quietly than he'd come down them, with his bottom rather dusty. And when he reached the great hall, the seneschal saw him coming and couldn't prevent himself from smiling a bit. And Brunesen said, "Where is he?" And Simon the Red said, "Well, he's a very fine knight, so I let him sleep. You did what? Said Brunison. Haven't I got a knight here who can help? And one of the captains of her guard stood up. He was a veteran soldier with a lot of experience. He said, I'll sort him out for you, my lady. You don't worry about a thing. So he set off down the stairs, and he didn't bother with any niceties at all with Jaufre. He just kicked him until Jaufre woke up. And Jaufre said, oh, not you again. We talked about this. We had an arrangement. Why are you here? And the captain said, get on your horse, we will fight, and I will take you to the owner of the castle. Oh, very well, said Jaufre, if you must, but I'm not playing games this time, I'm warning you. And this time when Jaufre rode at the captain of the guard, he pierced him through his body with a lance. And his men, the captain's men, horrified, carried the captain up the stairs back to the great hall. And when Brunison saw that, she said, this is ridiculous. A sleeping man, 3 of my best knights. She looked round at the other men in her castle. She said, if you want to stay in my service, bring him to me. And so 100 of them went down together. They were all a bit scared. And they didn't try and wake him up because they were very scared. So they picked him up as they could. So 3 men to an arm and whoever, they all gathered round and they carried him bodily up the stairs. And halfway up the stairs, Jaufre woke up. And he thought, what on earth? Are you demons? What are you doing? And they carried on, taking him up the stairs. And then they set him on his feet in front of Brunison. And Jaufre looked, and he saw Brunison. And Brunison saw Jaufre. And for a moment, well, you can imagine how Hollywood would do it. Jaufre thought how very beautiful she looked when she was angry. And she thought, my goodness, he is a very fine young man. But she didn't like to show her men how she was feeling. And so she said, you have been sleeping in my garden. And Jaufre said, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I shouldn't do that. But he said, if I'd known it was you who wanted me, you could have come alone, wearing nothing but your shift, and I would have come with you. And Brunison struggled to keep angry. And she said, I'm going to have you hanged. I'm going to have your eyes pulled out. I'm going to have your arms cut off. And Jaufre said, my lady, you can do whatever you want with me. I'm in your power completely. But can I ask one request? Would you let me sleep first for the night? Because I'm so tired. And the seneschal edged up to Brunison, I think you might as well do that, because we don't know anything about this young man. We don't know who he is. We don't know why he's travelling. He could be anyone, and it would be a mistake to kill him if we didn't know that. And Brunison was quite pleased to have the get out, so she said, yes, that would do. So she ordered them to make a bed for him in one of their guard rooms, and they put down a carpet, and they put down a bed, and they put blankets up on the bed. And without really any more ado, Jaufre flung himself, fully armoured, onto the bed and fell asleep. And she set a guard of 100 men to guard him. And she went back to her chamber, where she didn't sleep. She was tossing and turning, thinking, I know I shouldn't fall in love with a stranger, because who knows, he would just take off and go somewhere else, or he I don't know who he is. But then on the other hand, rich men aren't necessarily worth having, and you never know how they're going to behave, and very often they're not very brave and they're not very pleasant. And so she was arguing this thing about a rich man this, and a young man and a poor man, and she really didn't know what to do. Jaufre was fast asleep until the sound went for one of their periods of mourning and grief. And at the time when that sounded, every single man in the guardroom started weeping and wailing and beating at his chest and tearing at their hair. And Jaufre woke up. And he said, what on earth are you all doing? What's wrong with you? And at that point, the grief turned into fury. They started hitting him and bashing him and crushing him and thumping him and kicking him and hitting him again. And, if Jaufre hadn't been wearing his armour, this would be a different ending to the story. But Jaffrey decided the safest thing to do, because he thought by this point, these men are demons. There's no two ways about it. They're completely insane, or they're demons, or probably both. And he lay as still as he could, pretending to be dead. And eventually one of the men realized that's what was going on, and he said, I think we might have gone a bit too far. But on the other hand, she was going to have him hanged tomorrow anyway, wasn't she? So what's the difference? And this way we can get some sleep. And so the men went to sleep. And when Jaufre realized they were asleep, as quietly as he could, he tiptoed out of the room, down the stairs, down to the garden where he found his horse still there. He saddled up and he rode off. And Brunesen, as soon as dawn broke, she went to see what was happening with her prisoner. And halfway along the corridor, she met her seneschal, who said, where are you going, my lady? This isn't a good idea. And she said, I'm going to see the man you found, whoever he was. And the seneschal said, well, I think he's a bit dead. And Brunesen absolutely lost her temper, and she said, I don't believe that this is what you've been doing. 100 men to guard a sleeping man. And he's dead. Why is he dead? And she went into the room, she pulled back the covers, and of course, he wasn't there. And she turned on her seneschal and said, you will find him. You will have a year and a day to bring him back to me, and if you don't, you will rot in prison for the rest of your life. And so the seneschal got a group of men together. They had no idea where to start looking, but they set off in search of Jaufre. And that's where I'm going to stop. And if you want to know more, well, there is a podcast and there's also the books. And I'm not going to do a hard sell on the books, but if you do want to know about the books, the link is on the original invitation that I sent you. If not, Google Trivent and Tale of Jaufre, and you'll find it there in an order form. I don't have stocks here, so I can't do anything about it. So I'm going to open up the thing for everyone to be able to see each other, or if you want to. Yeah, Richard, the 1980s translation, it's by Ross Arthur, and it's, sorry, I don't know what I'm doing with this at the minute. It's good. It's an academic translation, which means it's got footnotes and everything. It's just not, it's no easier to find than my book. And also, what am I doing now? I'm getting myself in the right model. I want to have the gallery view, I think. Yeah, it's good, but it's not as readable as I would like it. So my idea in doing my adaptation was to make something that would be far more readily readable for most people and wouldn't necessarily be full of footnotes. If anyone wants to speak, by all means unmute yourself rather than feel you have to put things in the chat.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions or anything that you'd like to say?
That was just brilliant. Thank you so much.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, and thank you so much. I thought you really brought that to life. I particularly love the really bonkers parts. I've never heard anything like the episode where everybody puts their undergarments at the bottom of a dangerous slope to rescue the hero, but thank God they did.
The funny part about that really is that there's an awful lot of very serious scholarship that says that this is a metaphor for the patchwork nature of the story that is to follow, and it is a critique of Northern French kingship and blah, blah, blah. The thing is, if you dedicate a book to a king and then you critique the notion of kingship, it's a bit of a dodgy thing to do, it seems to me. But also, there's no mention of Northern French kingship being in any way at all. It's not a Northern French book. And the other thing is, as you probably noticed, when you tell the story, which is what would have happened, you can't get your brain thinking, oh, this is a metaphor for a patchwork. You're actually thinking, this is funny. And that's what I think it was for. I think this book is an absolutely fine example of bloody good rollicking entertainment. It's not serious. It's not got a hidden meaning. It's not a metaphor for the Grail, which some people have tried, heaven knows how, some people have tried to read Catharism into it. It doesn't it doesn't belong. And one of the things I found doing the episode with the leper was my first example of how different it is when you tell it, because when you read it off the page, it's just lines of text. When you do it and you try to convey the squire saying, help, 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 and then you've got Jaufre saying, what? You can't do it without there being levels of humour involved. It just changes the whole dynamic to it, and it was meant to be told. Any other questions or comments anyone would like to make?
I was just interested. Last you seem to have pinpointed the dating, which actually agrees with what I thought. I thought it was actually later than parts of the first continuation of Percival, and your dating actually makes quite a few things fall into place.
Yes,
You're taking me back nearly 40 years, by the way, since I read this first.
You're right. I mean, there is the two manuscripts differ about the clue about the first continuation, which is this wonderful thing about a dwarf throwing a roasting peacock at Sir Kay. And it's one version has a peacock and one version has a stick. So we don't know which one, but it does make sense that he might have known the first continuation.
But it just fits in with the time scale.
Yeah, it does. It fits most things. I mean, I can't think of many arguments to make it later or even earlier, to be honest.
No, I've only got one page and a bit about it in my book, but it does all fit in very nicely with what you're saying.
It was a challenge, though, I must admit. When I started reading all the scholarship, it just about boiled my head, because you read one and you think, oh, that makes complete sense. And then you read another and you think, oh, actually. But I was happy when I realised about the link with Eleanor of Aquitaine. It all made sense. The other thing I didn't say, which I meant to say, was the biggest giveaway, really, is there's a line towards the beginning of, he says, I heard this story from a foreign knight, a relative of Arthur and Gawain. And I'm going to tell you the best way I can, hope I remember it. And to my mind, that's, first of all, absolute proof that this was a bit of oral transmission back in the day. But it's quite possible that one of the knights from the court in England, or even northern France, might well have been visiting. Because as far as we know, Eleanor and her family did travel around and meet each other quite a lot. So it's quite possibly totally true, unlike finding an old book in a musty cellar or whatever. It sounds far more plausible that somebody told him the story.
Strangely, it's in Welsh and Latin that Arthur gets made a fool of, isn't it? Rather than in French and English. There's such an interweaving of influences.
There's a later bit of the story where, right at the end, where the wedding has happened, and there's a squire comes running in full of alarm, because they always are, and saying that, and it's a big bird in this case, it's a huge bird. And Arthur again says he'll go and deal with it. And the bird picks Arthur up and carries him around, and it does aeronautics in the sky and does double somersaults, and then drops him and swoops down and picks him up again. And of course, everyone again is panicking. And it's the same night he's been practicing magic again. And the Queen is so unamused. And she basically says, that's the one, Maria, don't you dare do that again. You and your magic, take it somewhere else. But I love the idea that there's Arthur who just doesn't seem to realise that it's not a good idea to go off and do things on his own. But the wonderful thing about Arthur is he laughs at himself. He's not the slightest bit annoyed about these things happening. He just thinks it's funny himself, which is good fun.
Oh, that was brilliant, thanks.
But as you say, as you said, Fiona, there are some totally bonkers bits of the story all round. I mean, I haven't even got onto the way in which Jaufre is taken to the underwater ferry, basically by being pushed headfirst into a fountain, which is, it's obvious, really. If you can't get your way by asking, you just push somebody in. Yeah. Any other questions? Actually, talking about the bird, I'll see if I don't know if I kept the one with the medieval one. No, not on this one. But the other one of Maria's drawings that I absolutely adore is this one. And this is a story where, again, we're going back into sort of fairy tale type stuff, but Jaufre has got some time to kill between bits of the adventure, and he goes into a forest, and he finds this old crone sitting underneath a pine tree, dressed in the most exquisite fabrics, and of course she's really ugly as sin. And when she stands up, he realizes she is a giantess, and it turns out she is the mother of the giant leper, and indeed of another giant we haven't met yet. And she has put a spell on the forest, and she was the one who put the spell on the giant's house in the first place, which is why she couldn't get out. That's the one. And the spell consists of a black knight that comes racing out with the sound of thunder and lightning, and he cannot be defeated. If you chop an arm off, it grows back again. If you chop his head off, it grows back again. But he can't fight up on foot. He disappears completely when you're unhorsed. And eventually, Jaufre is helped by a hermit, because there's always a hermit, isn't there? And the hermit has to sprinkle holy water, and that gets rid of the demon. But it's just absolutely incredible. It's sort of like all the stories you come across about the old hag who generally asks a question or wants to be kissed or whatever. Doesn't want any of that in Jaufre. She just wants to guard her road by having a demon right around the place. It's really quite intriguing things that you don't find elsewhere. Right, well, I said I would endeavour to finish in an hour and a half, and I've gone slightly over, but not much. If there aren't any more questions, then I will draw the meeting to a close. As I say, if you want a copy of the book, find the Trivent website. If you look for, I think I put the link up for the pack. If you do that, for some reason it's saying it's out of stock. So what you need to do is find a way to get the individual volumes there in stock, so you can order one or both. It's a cheaper price if you would. Putting them together is cheaper than buying them separately, but you don't obviously have to do that. And there's no obligation to buy whatsoever. There's also a podcast, which is, if you Google the Tale of Jaufre podcast, you'll find it, and that's me reading the translation. I did that during lockdown. So
I can't see the links for the book anywhere.
no, it should be on the original invitation that I sent you, but if it isn't, then, as I say, Trivent Publishing is what you need to Google. And if you Google either the Tale of Jaufre with my name or Telling the Tale of Jaufre, it will send you to that's the thing that comes up. Unfortunately, the actual URL is ridiculously long and complicated, so it's probably best to just use the title of the book and my name, get there that way. Okay. Thank you, Fiona.
That was brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you all enjoyed it. The idea was to communicate my enthusiasm, and I hope I've done it.
Yeah, amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, a very good night to you all, and take care as you go through any forests, in case of any.
Thank you so much, Anne. That really woke me up after a heavy weekend of folk festivaling.
Okay.
And down in Sydney, it's 7:40 a.m. now, so I'm fully awake after your storytelling. Thank you.
My goodness. Well, I'm very impressed that you could be it, and I'm glad that Claire's there as well, because I did try emailing her and it kept saying it didn't exist. So I'm glad you're here.
Same time for me. The cat's insisting on being fed, even though it's too early for him.
Before I go, Anne, do you want me to just quickly flick through, because I was drawing just then when you were talking. So I'll come up with slightly different ones. So this was before you started talking. And then I don't know if you can see them okay. Can you see them?
Just about.
Yes.
I can see them. I can see them.
So it's like each time I would hear the story, I would probably end up, just as a storyteller tends to tell the story slightly differently each time, I would end up with slightly different drawings each time. And there's the leper. stealing the baby.
Oh, yeah.
There he is under the table, slicing the thing.
That is the other thing I love, is that Joffrey is so unheroic in that episode, where he needs to be revived by the maiden and basically rescued by the maiden because he's fallen unconscious, and yeah, not behaving very much like a hero, really. Ah, yes, fast asleep.
There we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and helping out. That's great. Okay, well, you all know my email address, I think, so if you have anything else you want to say or contact me on Facebook or whatever, then do so, and if anything occurs to you. But thank you very much for coming, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye now.